Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Christopher Shackleton, and I'm the Digital Transformation Projects Coordinator here at the Ontario Museum Association. I'm joining you from the OMA offices here in Toronto with a kind of blue background behind me with our OMA logo. I'm a male in his late 20s with short brown hair, and today I'm wearing a green sweater. As an organization of provincial scope, the Ontario Museum Association recognizes that its members and community live and work on the lands and territories of Indigenous peoples. We are thankful to the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have cared for these territories since time immemorial and to continue to contribute to all communities across the province. We acknowledge that there are more than 40 treaties and other land acknowledgements that cover Ontario, and that the descendants and cultures of the First Peoples who lived here are a vibrant and integral part of our society today. We gratefully acknowledge and deeply value the opportunity we have to learn from and cherish the contributions of Indigenous peoples of the past, present, and into the future. As we acknowledge the colonial legacy of museums, we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As you participate in this gathering, we invite you to reflect on the land that you are on, who the traditional keepers of the land are, what the treaty relationship is, or if it is unceded territory. Toronto, where the OMA offices are located, is the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement and is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Thank you everyone for joining us for our webinar today on approaches to online exhibits. This webinar is part of our Small Bytes webinar series, which is supporting the digitalization of Ontario's smaller and rural museums in particular, but with a focus to make sure that all museums are supported for their digital transformation. This is brought to you in part by the Government of Canada. I want to make sure that everyone knows how to participate today. You should be able to see the slides and to see and hear our panelists speak. If you'd like to send a question to our panelists, simply type your message into the Q&A box that you can access at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to say hello to your colleagues on the call, you can chat with them using the chat feature, also available at the bottom of your screen. At the bottom of your screen, you can also turn on automated closed captions for the webinar. OMA staff will be monitoring the chat and can help you out with any technical questions that you may have. So this morning, we've assembled a great group of panelists who will be talking us through their approaches to their online exhibits at their institutions. Hopefully from this, you learn some tools, tips, and techniques that you can take forward with your own institution. Up first, I'd like to invite Kendra Campbell from the Royal Ontario Museum to share her slides and to unmute. So Kendra collaborates with museums, archives, and art galleries to create meaningful experiences. Within exhibition and programming teams, she is a vocal advocate for visitor needs, knowledges, and expertise. At the core of her evolving practice is a deep commitment to rebuilding trust, forming relationships, and honoring process with community partners. Previously, she led the interpretation for redefining Black identity at Band Gallery and Cultural Center and authored the exhibition's companion essay, To Be Dignified, Stylish, and Black, that was published in Heritage Matters. She has served on numerous juries and committees and has presented on visitor-centered exhibition development. Campbell holds a Master of Museum Studies as well as a Master of Information in Archives and Records Management from the University of Toronto. She currently works as an interpretive planner at the Royal Ontario Museum. Thanks for joining us today, Kendra, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris. Greetings, everyone. So glad to be joining you today on behalf of my colleagues at the Royal Ontario Museum. In the time we have today, before discussion with the other panelists, I'll share some examples of what digital offerings, online exhibitions look like at ROM as of late. Like many of you, we have spent the last few years reflecting, interrogating, experimenting with online exhibitions, and there's been good discussion about this. Should we do this? Is there still an appetite for it? What resources are readily available now and are available to maintain this in the future? I think specifically about my role in interpretive planning. We are asking what the visitor experience with digital or information technologies could look like. Where does it overlap with other on-site experiences and programs? And I think most importantly, what are some of the visitor expectations if we are to start experimenting in this space? So for the examples today, these are just two of the recent projects we've been experimenting with. The first, shown on the left, is a companion online exhibition to the on-site exhibition called The Cloth That Changed the World, India's Painted and Printed Cottons. It's hosted on Matterport, which uses 3D cameras and virtual reality. And on the right, this is a view from our newest exhibition hosted on Google Arts and Culture. This is another online platform for content, visual images. It's open to nonprofits, used by all sorts of cultural institutions. Both exhibitions followed a similar planning process. And at ROM, that's where we moved through phases of concept, design, and production. I'll say a key difference for these two projects was that for A Clock That Changed the World, the digital came after the physical was already designed, developed, and installed. Whereas with Aftershocks, the project on the right, Earthquake Prints, from the outset, it was always intended to be a purely online experience. And for me, as I sit in the interpretive planning, working with curators, designers, our digital team, I think the common through point was about choice points. When we think about exhibitions, we typically have one entrance. And for online, we're very, very interested in entering from any point. You may not have the same kind of scaffolding that we would offer visitors at the entrance of an on-site exhibition. And so I see more and more exhibitions, both online and on-site, making this shift, but it was certainly top of mind for us when we started our planning. I'd advocate again for here, when we think about scaffolding, this idea about the principles of repetition and reinforcement and how that can serve some of the goals of the exhibition. So we will look at a couple of these in detail. There were a lot of great learnings that came out of doing these two projects so close in timeline, less than 2 years apart. I'll say the key question for us was about leveraging digital. I often found myself saying over and over again, what can the digital do that the in-person offering can't? And that was often a starting point for a lot of rich discussion. So we'll spend a moment just looking at some views from Matterport. We had 3D cameras photograph the space. It was comprehensive. The cultural material or objects were photographed, the labels, the kinds of corridors and pathways in between, everything was captured. And this was at a time when we were in discussion of when you cannot be physically present in the museum, what is the alternative? An underlying goal was to create an experience that would serve as another option for folks who couldn't join us in person. So a couple more views. You'll see it has a kind of navigation pane at the bottom that flips up and flips down. You can move by using these dots. Some of you are already familiar with this. When I think about visitor experience, there's a key point here for us, which was that there's a kind of closeness and intimacy with objects that you cannot get on site, but you may be able to get it online. So this is typically the setback for where visitors would stand to interact with this object. But online, you get a much, much different perspective. And these are the kinds of parts of the experience we really wanted to focus in so that we weren't just recreating the on-site online, but making sure that it had unique characteristics of that experience. One other thing we were able to do was about embedding the videos. And this was certainly a new learning for us about how much of the experience, how are we being selective about what can go online versus what lives on site? How do we balance those two visitor groups? Pleased to learn that things like embedding the videos is all part of the package of what's possible. Key for us at ROM is the idea about visitor evaluation and feedback. And so Matterport already supplies some of the basic information about visitation, how people are using, but we wanted a deeper look. And so our audience insight team worked closely with us to determine a set of questions that would tell us not only how people are using it, but what they think about it, whether they would use it again, whether they found it useful. Are we matching up with some of the visitor outcomes that we had set at the beginning of the project? So I've pulled just a couple quotes here from this sample of surveys. You'll notice people agreed that it was, they enjoyed freedom to move freely through the exhibit, leapfrogging over exhibitions, that it was easy to get from item to item, figuring out how to see the descriptions. Someone else found it very, very informative. So all these comments were good for us to see about, is this a platform we want to use further? Is it worth seeing what other features are available? We also captured some areas of improvement we heard from visitors. I'll start with this one about being difficult to navigate. We'll often see both in a set of data like this. Another person talked about the need for instructions. So you'll see when we look at the data, you'll see some people find it very easy, some people are having a harder time, and that's all worth considering when we think about a recommendation for the future. Again, as my role in interpretive planning, I found this one very interesting about an introduction from the curator would have been nice, pretty boring just navigating through on your own. And so again, all of these things we can take away and think when we plan to do this in the future, how are we building in visitor expectations to the final experience? A couple more slides for our evaluation I'll share. You'll see in another example, ROM uses a big idea and a set of visitor outcomes. Here, useful for my planning, what did visitors say about the overall enjoyment with the content and the objects? What are surprising things that visitors learned? Again, another great chance to look at the data really closely and think, what did people take away from the online exhibition and what did people take away from the on-site? It's an interesting matchup where you see people who were interested in reading the labels for a longer period of time online than they were on site. And that kind of matches up with new research about visitor fatigue and what visitors expect from an experience as well. Okay, I know we're mindful of the time. At this point, I want to switch over to our second example that we'll talk about here. This was an online exhibition with Google Arts and Culture. It looked at one object in the collection. So as with the cloth that changed the world, we had more than 100 different objects to think about how we bring those online. This online exhibition looked at one single object in the collection. It's an album. It's an album of about 80 different unique prints that have been assembled after an 1855 earthquake in Japan. And so when I think back to the question, how can we leverage digital? What can we do online that we cannot do in person? The idea of displaying this album where many people all interacting at once have an opportunity to work with the same object, to experience the same thing, does not easily exist in person, but it does present a really, really interesting opportunity for online. And so this is where we kind of started our thinking about how can we bring this experience to a different set of visitors. We'll go to the next one. So individually, all of the prints can be found on the ROM Collection's website, but how do we bring that together to be a more complete experience? One of the things that we start doing at ROM is thinking about user experience, a kind of journey mapping or visitor pathway. And so our content team for this might be a curator, might be a 2D or 3D designer, certainly the interpretive planner. We started playing around with what are the different parts of the experience we want people to take away from. We used another free online platform. This one was called Mural, but there are a lot of these kinds of whiteboard brainstorm. And it's kind of just like an object card sort. We started playing around with different combinations of things. If you look at this print first, does it set you up in a new way to look at this? Can you apply knowledge from this print, use it further down? We ended up with roughly 3 different sets of experiences that would form the final exhibition. Each one has its own theme or central focus, and each section has a set of experiences within that. So with the 10 images, there are opportunities for detailed image exploration, looking closely, and then some of the other features such as an audio, video, or model experience as well. Again, this is part of our interpretive planning practice. We use a big idea, this one about what is meaningful about this topic to visitors. It's not just putting the content up. How can we create opportunities for meaning making? And we also developed a set of visitor outcomes that I'll just share. And so when we think back to where we are in the project now, this is one of the central pieces of information. Are visitors taking away, are they receiving the kind of experiences that we set out at the initial stage? So just a moment, I'm going to switch over and we'll do a bit of a live demo with the actual online exhibition that launched. Okay, welcome to Aftershocks, Japanese Earthquake Prints. So Google Arts and Culture, it sets up its experiences in stories. There are 3 stories that happen to be part of this Aftershocks exhibition. And I'll just flip through. You'll see one way that we're always trying to reflect back on what we heard from visitors. There was no introduction for the Thought That Changed the World exhibition, but we were able to think about how we build that into the experience for Aftershocks. And so this is here, we're featuring our curator as well as one of our community partners who helped us develop the exhibition. In this case, it was Japan Foundation Toronto. And we'll just flip through. I apologize, I'm moving quickly, but we can put the link in the chat for you to explore on your own. It follows a similar, kind of label hierarchy. So there are ways to work in a kind of summary intro text. There are ways to work in object IDs or extended labels that help tell the story. We also were really interested in, again, how can we leverage digital? What are the kinds of options around video, around audio? One that was particularly interesting to us is at the bottom of this experience. It's a model of a catfish, which is part of the Japanese folk belief about earthquakes. And so again, another great transdisciplinary opportunity for us. How do we bring in our fish collection as well as our arts and culture collection and bring those 2 together? There are ways to bring in reference material, kind of collateral images that help tell your story. Just looking at a few more ways to group objects together. There are a lot of great things about the platform that easily matched up with the kinds of tools and strategies that we were already using on site, but allowing us to do it in a bit of a different way. And that was most exciting. Here's an example of one of the close looking. And then this is that model we had mentioned earlier. So here, whereas this not as easy to move in person, this actually moves when you're using the website online. You can spin the fish around and have a way to engage and make comparisons between the fish in our collection and the fish that you'll see in the kinds of prints that are also part of the album. Just mindful of time, summing up here. So this exhibition launched in November, and there's been steady numbers throughout. One strength of Google is that there are great facts and figures about the usage available, the number of views. We're currently sitting around 10,000, the average time on page. This is getting into what we consider the really valuable information about us for planning. But again, keenly interested in the deeper evaluation that provides insight as to the visitor outcomes that we mentioned earlier. Now that it's launched, my team and I were entering in these discussions about whether we should do this again, what would it take? My colleagues and I are most interested in setting up a kind of criteria for platform use. And so there's been talk about, is there a match between the content and the platform? This exhibition, I think what worked well is that it was all 2D images, almost like wall works, flat works on paper. It would have a different experience if we were trying to work with sculptural material or objects that weren't in that kind of dimension. And so all of these are factoring into our kind of recommendation for the future planning. And I will stop there.
Well, thank you so much, Kendra. Always lovely to see what our colleagues at the ROM are up to and doing. Certainly with, they've been very gracious around their digital team talking to us at the OMA about the work that they're doing. So thank you for presenting today, Kendra. I'll get Natalie Wood of the Brockville Museum queued up, ready to go next. And so Natalie is the curator director at the Brockville Museum, a community museum in southeastern Ontario. She has been working in small museums for nearly 2 decades and has experience in almost every aspect of museum operations. Her passion is exhibit development, finding creative ways to tell stories that connect with audiences. She has presented on the theme, designing exhibits on a shoestring budget, and was lead on an exhibition project that won the OMA's Award of Excellence in 2019. In addition to a degree in history, Natalie has a certificate in museum studies and a professional specialization certificate in visitor and community engagement. Thank you for joining us, Natalie, and go ahead.
Thank you, Chris. So yeah, I come from Brockville Museum. It's a community museum in southeastern Ontario. Brockville itself is only a community of about 22,000. And it's important to note that in our community, the median age skews quite a bit older than the Canadian average. So most of our audience is a little bit older at 49 and a half. And also we're in a community where not everyone has access to high-speed internet or even reliable internet. So those are factors that we have to consider when we're looking at taking our exhibits online. So I have been here for almost 10 years as the curator director, but I am one of 3 staff members here. And I have to say, I am not a tech expert. This is not my field of expertise, but pretty much since 2017, it's crept its way into my large job description and is taking over more and more of that as we go. So today, that includes running the museum's Facebook page, Twitter accounts, YouTube channel, website, and our digital museum site that I'll talk about a little today. But as said, this is a very small part of my role, but we do recognize the increasing importance of having online media to carry out our mandate and reaching our strategic goals. So how did things start for us to go online? So this actually started for us back in 2017. We started thinking about virtual exhibits or putting more content online. And really this came from how we were using Facebook. For Canada 150, we ran a Facebook series of 150 years of Brockville history for Canada's 150. And in that campaign, we were posting an archival photo or object each day for 150 days, February 2nd to July 1st, 2017 on Facebook. And this proved to be a hugely popular social media campaign that increased our Facebook following by 40% during that period. So clearly people were interested in this content and seeing images and objects in this way. But we wanted to be able to provide easier access to past posts. And we also knew that some of our audience that wanted to engage with this content wasn't on Facebook. So we needed a place to put all of this that allowed those audiences not on Facebook to access the information, but also a place where we could put all of that content that we had worked so hard to put together. And the problem with our current website was that because we're part of the municipality here, the contract for who manages our website was outside of our control. And we didn't really have the usability, the functionality of our website to be putting up lots of images and content like this. So I kind of went exploring of what other options might be out there and landed on Wix site. Which is free, easy to use templates, and then you can set up like galleries or carousels of images with captions, which really complemented what we had been doing on Facebook. So the content went together quite seamlessly. And so we ended up just building an entirely new website on Wix that we call the Digital Museum site, where we could host any kind of virtual content we wanted to create. And essentially, once we had that platform, it was natural to build more content. So that year, we added 2 additional virtual exhibits, mainly a companion to what we were doing in person. So one of our temporary in-person exhibits went online, as well as a virtual version of a pop-up exhibit that we did around Remembrance Day. And pretty much from there on, a virtual version of almost every temporary exhibit we did was also created. And I will say that this move also dovetailed really nicely with other efforts we were doing to make the rest of our collection available online. We'd started a project in 2013 to digitize our collection, put it online, process we're still working on, but this kind of content sharing online really worked together with those strategic goals and making those things available. So the great pivot of 2020. When the pandemic hit, we were really fortunate to already have this platform and a formula for putting our content online. One thing we've been working on in March of 2020 was an exhibit called Painting Picnic. And we'd had a lot of publicity around the in-person version of this exhibit. We had brought in loans from other institutions, other individuals from across the province. So there was already a lot of hype around that. And then it was supposed to open on March 31st of 2020, which of course didn't happen. But working with our partners, we were able to really quickly create a digital version of that exhibit. And because we'd had all that buzz around it ahead of time, the digital went really, really well, just the timing of everything. So because we already had a lot of that buzz, word of mouth, and the connection to all those lending institutions, and then people couldn't travel, once we put it online, it was hugely successful, with a reach well beyond Brockville, thanks to all that initial promotion. Our digital museum site saw a 470% increase in unique visitors between February and March of 2020. And while it did level off a little bit after that, that initial lockdown period, we still see significant reach that has really stabilized well above that pre-pandemic level. So we know there is still interest in having this content available online. And so again, because we already had this, we were able to quickly develop additional content using this platform. So we did exhibits on Cholera Hits Brockville, Maine and Brockville, and a virtual version of the museum's 200th, or local newspaper's 200th anniversary temporary exhibit. So again, we just had that formula, so we were quickly able to do it. And again, I would say in our case, these are all just photographs of either objects or actual archival images that we are just posting online. So just a couple examples. This one here is Painting Picnic. And you can see kind of behind the scenes on Wix site of what that template looks like. And again, this was very straightforward, being that it was just a lot of artwork. And so we just posted each one. Some of the challenges with this site is just the limited characters that you can put in the descriptions. But of course, that's succinct label writing. So it's a good practice anyway. You can see the difference in the in-person versus the online. And then I mentioned 200 years of printing history exhibit. So again, very much an object-focused exhibit. And we know the online is not going to be the same as the physical experience. So it's more for us like a curated journey through the collection based on the topic. So this in the newspaper exhibit, for example, the in-person exhibit included stories and biographies of the people who worked at the paper, where the virtual version focused exclusively on the objects that represented the paper's history and timeline. But again, going back to how this dovetails with digitizing our collection, this really allowed us to profile how our collection is available online. So where do we go from here? Our Wix site, the Digital Museum, continues to serve as a platform for content that we originally created for Facebook. Most recently, we did a series on Facebook on house histories, some of the local homes that have notable history in Brockville. And while this literally was just a few photographs with a description, because we had curated those together, it proved really popular when the Ontario Heritage Conference was held in Brockville in June 2022, because the conference actually promoted our digital museum site as a resource to learn more about the local buildings. And most recently, we were able to turn one of our monthly talks that we do into a virtual exhibit. So again, it's that repurposing of content that we're already creating and just making it available online. So our initial foray into online exhibits was based on having a place to hold and share born digital content and to share our work digitizing our collection. The opportunity to repurpose existing content that is either on physical display or used in programs to reach a growing audience has become clear. And what works for us is that this formula requires very little additional resources, making it sustainable and achievable for us. So through this effort, we've seen success with meeting the interests of a virtual audience and with meeting our own strategic goals of increasing the museum's visibility, both locally and outside of our geographical area. We've come to respect that online audiences are a legitimate audience in their own right, whether or not they ever visit our physical space, and that's okay. So my advice is to be intentional and purposeful when deciding to make something available virtually. Consider your mandate and strategic goals. I mean, increasing visibility for us was really important, and providing access to our collection is a part of our mandate. So know why you are making something available online. And after all, even if you are using a free site, you are representing your institution online. And repurposing existing material does still take resources. So don't be afraid that you don't have the resources to be flashy or interactive. If you decide that sharing your collection and stories online is important to you, just do what you can do without putting too much pressure on yourself. So my final thought, just I know some people are interested in what resources are available for free. So like I said, I mentioned that we use Wixsite. So Wixsite does offer similar analytics to Google and Facebook. For me, I just focus on the number of page views and the reach. Word count limits can be restrictive to telling bigger stories. So we design content around that. And there are also limitations with the free Wix version in that there are ads. Your site does include the wixsite.com. And they have recently changed that storage is now up to 500 megabytes. So it's a little bit smaller than it once was. And I will say, while we've been very happy with our Wix site and what we've been able to do, we are going to be redesigning our own website soon with a whole new provider through the city. So we will be integrating our Wix site into our own homepage. But we've learned a lot through the different opportunities with building templates around that. And again, just doing what we can with the resources we have. So thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Natalie. I know that I was super glad to connect with you to get a chance to see all the work that you had done, and to certainly the opportunities that presented themselves because of the pandemic. You were well situated, I think, to be able to pivot as much as we all did during that first initial lockdown time. So thank you so much. Next up on deck, we have Peter Pavement, the CEO of Surface Impression. So Peter is the creative director and founder of Surface Impression, a digital design and development agency that specializes in work for the cultural sector. Peter has been working with museums and heritage organizations for over 22 years, helping them to create engaging digital interfaces to collections, venues, and histories. He holds a doctorate from the University of Leicester's Department of Museum Studies, investigating the production of media by museums in both a historical and contemporary context. He frequently runs workshops and training sessions to help museum professionals develop their skills with data, analytics, and project management. Thank you so much, Peter. I'll let you unmute and take it away.
Thank you so much, Chris. And hello to everybody. So I will be presenting some of the projects that we at Surface Impression have worked on, hopefully to give different ideas about how you can approach online exhibitions, of which there are so many, as you've already seen. So you heard a bit about me and Surface Impression from Chris, but just to kind of reiterate some of those and sort of dive into that. So as you heard, we were founded 22 years ago, and we're specialists in working with the cultural sector in general. We say that we help the cultural sector to make the most of digital. That's our mission. But actually, we've got a real niche in museums as well, and we really help museums of all shapes and sizes. So although there's some kind of big names on the right-hand side there, in terms of the GLAM sector, the galleries, libraries, archives, and museums sector, we actually work with the giants as well as the one person or no people kind of completely voluntary organization as well. And we have 19 people, and we manage to produce about 30 different kind of projects a year. And we also have ongoing support for the organizations that we helped produce digital products for in the past. And that now numbers about 200 organizations. We were founded in the UK, where I am from, as you probably detected. But now I live in Toronto, and our Canadian operation is actually a very significant part of the business, and we are continuing to expand internationally. And as you heard, that we're working in production, like we're making digital products, but we also engage with consultancy and training and support and general sector development. So online exhibitions, I was thinking in preparation for this talk that, well, when did we start doing online exhibitions? When was that? And actually, I think there were kind of projects that we could have called an online exhibit, really right back to the beginning of our operation. But I think where we actually did explicitly say something was an online exhibition started for us around 2008. And we did a lot of work with the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford in the UK. And through the Wayback Machine at the Internet Archive, I discovered Shelley's Ghost, one of the projects we did, still is reasonably intact. So I was able to screenshot it there. And then there's a sort of brand new project on the right on the screen there that is in fact going to launch later today, working for the Portrait Gallery of Canada. And it's I'll show you it in a second. But this kind of initial wave of interest in online exhibitions, especially in the UK, I think kind of peaked around when the Olympics came to London, and there was money and interest and a kind of cultural Olympiad that helped drive that. And so there was a lot of interest and kind of activity around online exhibitions. And then, of course, recently, as we've heard, and we will hear many, many times, is that that there was a big revival of interest in that, accelerated by the pandemic. And it's probably not a great need to explain that in detail. But what is important, I think, is to say that there is a desire and a demand to kind of continue with that innovation. It may be hard with our resourcing and with our availability of money and time, etc. But there's definitely a desire to build on the positive gains that came out of that period of time. So we are producing online exhibitions continuously. There is no time in our various studios production work that we are not working on an online exhibition. It is a component of almost half of our projects. And so as a result of that, we've realized that there's so many ways to do an online exhibition. There is the creative and communicative aspects of it are myriad. And really, online exhibition isn't a defined thing. It's a bit kind of like, if you say it is an online exhibition, then it is. So that is the kind of context that we're working in. So I'm just going to take you through a few examples. I've got them live as tabs here, and I'll try and just watch my time so I don't overrun. But I'm going to start with a couple of art examples. So a recent project, the previous project for the Portrait Gallery of Canada, was a retrospective of the artist Max Dean, Canadian artist Max Dean, who operates in a very kind of multidisciplinary and conceptual sort of sphere. And one of the kind of first things that I think we often go to when thinking about online exhibitions is stepping outside of the frame of the ordinary. So instead of having something where there's the kind of navigation system of the website of, say, the Portrait Gallery surrounding the content of the exhibit, we actually remove that. And so that we're just focusing on the exhibit. And that is kind of one of the defining points for our practice around what is exhibit and what is just website. That you've got this step out, that you're focused. And it's a bit like when you create exhibitions for your gallery space, you don't always follow the house branding style of your organization. Very often the exhibit has its own logic, its own style, its own way of working. The other thing is that we find we like to do is lots of kind of interactivity, design experiments, things that kind of aren't the normal. Sometimes they're even the things that we would definitely recommend against in a standard website or other digital product, but actually work really nicely in this kind of somewhat other space. So for example, in this Max Dean one, we went for a scrolling option. And as I kind of go through here, that basically captures the scroll and then moves across as if you're kind of walking through a gallery space. But I'm not changing my scroll direction. I'm just keep scrolling and then it's showing me the works. And at any point I can dive into these and actually see what they're all about. But I can just keep going through the overview like this. And I can kind of reverse and go forwards. And it's a really kind of nice experience for this particular case. If we put this in a mainstream website, it would probably be a usability nightmare. But here it actually suits the topic, suits the artist, etc. And each one of these we can dive into. So one of Max's kind of most known pieces is this robotic chair. I'll just give a tiny play of the clip, but essentially he created a chair that breaks itself into pieces and then reconstructs itself with a robotic interaction. And let's just give it a second to break itself to bits. There we go. And if you watch that film, it will continue to put itself together. So this show that we're about to launch today, Gurdeep Pandar, he is a bit of an internet sensation, again, stemming from the pandemic and when more attention was given to online things. And Gurdeep is known for his very positive videos and TikTok clips and everything that he does based around Bhangra. And so he does these wonderful Bhangra dances and frames that in around joy and positive feeling and really kind of engaging with loads of different social media audiences through that. So we didn't want to just show a bunch of YouTube clips you can do that through YouTube. So the curator here, Narendra, he has actually created this interface that we collaborated on that explores Gurdeep's work through poetry and video and color and all sorts of aspects. And we even have that if I go into one of these. We have a presentation where we have the poetry, the film, audio of the poem, and music all working together. I have not shared audio, so you will be glad to not be hearing this at the same time. It doesn't make sense out of context, but there's a lot of interesting exploration around how these different media work together. Moving on, we now have, sorry, right, here we go. So thinking about 3D space. So this particular project is for an organization in the UK called Outside In, and their mission is to provide access to the art world for people who are marginalized through disability or through social exclusion or any circumstance really where they want to be interacting with the art world, want to be exhibiting, want to be part of that, but can't. And this is an online exhibition that we helped Outside In produce, where a curator put together a little selected show from the different artists that Outside In we're working with. So here we've actually mocked up, like mimicked a real space, like a gallery, in the kind of conventions of how galleries are made. And then, but at the same time, especially for accessibility, we have presented the content as text here that is navigable through keyboard, through screen readers, etc. And you can see that there are options to see it described, to watch a British Sign Language video, or to visit. Each one of these artists has their own kind of gallery space within the site, as well as this exhibit. So you can navigate through the space, like I can turn around and sort of operate this, and I can also click on these little numbers, and they will connect with the text on the right here. But I can also just click on these links here, and it will go and find the particular piece. So there's a nice interaction between the 3D space and the standard space. Just coming back to my slides. So if we skip on a bit past those, the other kinds of online exhibit that we're often doing are historical pieces. So here's a piece that we did for that actually took a traveling exhibition that had stopped touring and tried to capture that in online space. So if I dive into this, this was an exhibition that toured around the UK and really sought to bring to life the US civil rights movement and the historical context and artifacts and stories and other things associated with that, and also connect that to some British experience. So the traveling exhibit itself used a lot of plywood as part of its design. So we took little elements of that and wove that through the graphic design. And then if I kind of go into some of the stories, we used a very story-led approach here. And there was a kind of lifted from different motifs and ideas that were in the real life exhibition, but then brought them through in a way that could be explored in much more detail and could be accompanied by media such as audio and film, etc., and could have deeper connection, for example, with transcripts. That's something that people struggle a bit to engage with in the physical space, again, with poetry, poetic interpretation, and so on. We also have produced projects with academia, with either museum collections within universities or actually just project work by universities that we're going to turn into exhibitions. In this case, we have something from University College London that they're exploring the concept of complicity of the atrocities of Nazi rule and how those were handled in the during the Second World War period and afterwards. So it's a very difficult topic, very difficult subject matter. And this was actually going to be a touring exhibition that had been cancelled by COVID. And so the online exhibition actually took the artwork, the design that had been created for that touring exhibit, and then reformatted and reused the concepts of it for an online space. So you can see it's very angular, very grey, dark, high contrast, and it's kind of difficult like the topic, and it's uncomfortable like the topic. So we've kind of found a design style that mimicked what it was going to be as a physical space, but also enhanced that within digital and making that work in mobile and things like that at the same time, which is always a bit of a challenge. So following on from that, another historical example, we have a piece which we did very recently for the University of Cambridge, and this is exploring Darwin's life, and we've done a lot of work around the history and letters of Charles Darwin that they hold at the University of Cambridge Library. And this particular one, we really went for an integration of a book concept and a map concept, and really tried to show a particular aspect of the voyage of the Beagle where there was a geological expedition into what is now Chile. And there's a lot of storytelling, but it also integrates objects from museum collections, and it integrates letters from the archive. And we can dive into the level of the object and actually see some of the specimens that were collected and play them also. We would, except my browser has now blocked it, but there's a 3D object that sits here that you can interact with and see basically the rocks. Oh no, here we go, it's working now. So we can basically interact with the 3D model of the various geological collections. I'm not going to wait for this to kind of take on, but it's to load, but it's a good little project and very theatrical in nature. So finally, just to wrap up, I wanted to just kind of talk about user-generated content. So one of the things that really brings these things to life is to work with audiences for content of collections. And so a few examples that we've done, this is what we did with the Welcome collection, where we wanted to reinterpret what nature means to the audience, to audiences and to people in general. And in this case, the public was invited to bring objects that represented nature to them to the museum And they turned that into an exhibition of purely user-generated content. And we accompanied that with a web-based thing that was collecting digital material in the same way. And we used things like Instagram and stuff like that to feed it. And then we had a whole interface where people could assess what had been submitted. And that gave us a kind of loop back of data and engagement and interesting kind of stories that emerged from that. And we were able to then display those within the gallery space. So there's a rather poor quality photo of one of our kind of display units that was showing the things that were resonating most with people. And then there were iPads at the bottom here where people could vote in that same way with it. I'm out of time, so I'll stop here, but we can bring up some of the things in questions at the end. There's little examples and things like that that may be useful that I have to hand. So thank you very much. And back to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Peter. It's always interesting to see how we can reflect the content and sort of messages of our exhibits within the design and even the functionality of these websites. So I think that's interesting to see kind of from the content driving what the medium then looks like. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Peter. Up next on deck is Heidi Reitmeyer, the Executive Director at Myseum of Toronto. So I'll let you start with your screen share and get unmuted there, Heidi. So Heidi loves museums. For over 20 years, she has worked in visual arts institutions around the world, holding positions at the Art Gallery of Ontario, Museum of Contemporary Art Toronto, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago. She has led public programming and learning departments at the Vancouver Art Gallery, Tate Gallery, and the Institute of Contemporary Art London, and produced radio for the BBC. She returned home 4 years ago and has joined Myseum with a passion to grow the organization. Take it away, Heidi.
I have to find myself first. Here I am. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Chris, and it's a hard act to follow, speaking through everyone. So I'm going to try to be quick so we can get to conversations, but also maybe speaking a little out of, maybe not out of school, but Myseum. If people know our work, we've been in existence for about 8 years. We're committed to telling the stories of histories, but also really connecting people together to think about how we all exist and live together in Toronto. We don't have a collection, and until very recently didn't have a building. So we have ironically been known for doing a lot of work online, and yet our resources and understanding of the digital have, I wouldn't say have been extensive. I would say we've definitely been learning through the process and learning through the various projects. Literally, we are a space of experimentation. We don't have objects. So when we talk about our collection, I think we're really talking about a digital collection. So we don't have that, again, traditional notion of taking what we house or what we are custodians of and then putting those things online. We do something very different. With that in mind, 8 years ago when they built up Myseum, our website was incredibly, or is, it completely lacks functionality. It's a WordPress site, nobody quite knows how to use it. We call it the Frankenstein site. It's been put together through many different users, many different developers in-house. It's designed in a tile fashion, as you can see. So you literally scroll down, but there's some significant issues about how we use it. So part of our challenge has been how do you create online experience that is engaging, that isn't just an archive of what you've done in the real. For me, I think one of the biggest learnings, having come from traditional museums such as the Tate, I was a deputy director at the Art Gallery of Ontario for a couple of years. Now at Myseum, I opened MoCA. I was the ED at the Contemporary Museum here in Toronto. So I've worked in many, many, many different museums, big and small. And I think for me, the strength of Myseum, one of the strengths of Myseum is the people. And the reason I say this is in museums, from my experience, we often don't look outside, we look inside. We refer to colleagues, we talk to each other. Myseum, I'm the only museum person at Myseum. everyone else comes from a different discipline. They come from theater, they come from community activism, they come from the digital, they come from TV, they come from sports channels, so it's this amazing group of people who are, I think, making things different because there isn't preconceived notions of what an exhibition should be or what online content should be. So I'm just putting that out there for people who are working in smaller organizations or even larger organizations. One of my breakthroughs was really reaching out beyond the museum space to really think about expertise outside. I want to talk about 3 projects we've done. The first is Derail, the History of Black Railway Porters in Canada, which is a multimedia exhibition. And this was an exhibition that was very much supposed to be a traditional exhibition at the Railway Museum here in Toronto. And then pandemic hit and we had to actually turn it to an online. So I would describe it as a play within a traditional exhibition. There's a set of dialogues about the experience of being a porter that's embedded in the historical narrative of the history of railway porters in Canada that was designed and written by Cecil Foster, a historian, author, journalist. Again, another thing about Myseum that I will say that they've done or we do well or very interesting, you can see the tile formation on the right-hand side. This is a screenshot, but when you go on our website, you will see that it's very basic in how this site is designed. But one of the things we've done really well, again, which is looking outside the disciplines of museums, is we are very much an interdisciplinary space. We think about what it means to incorporate different disciplines inside. And in this case, it's a theatrical experience, working with a playwright, Megan Swaby, who wrote the narratives, the dialogues. And I'll give you an example of Training Day. So these are embedded within the historical formations, but there's a way of engaging with our visitors that I think is very emotive, very personal, which often online is a difficult thing. These spaces are cold, they're alienating. You're not in a physical space with visitors, with a friend necessarily. You're often alone looking on a screen. So we think a lot about what not only is the competition in the context of online experiences, but also what is a kind of way of reaching our viewers differently. So I'm just going to play a clip of this.
Oh, Heidi, you might have to reshare with computer audio.
Oh, I don't think I know how to do that. So we'll skip this, but people can definitely log on and listen. I'll just go to the next slide because I'll be out of time. By the time I work it out, Chris, we'll be 12 o'clock. The second project is 1851 Spirit and Voice. This, so when we did Derailed, we launched Derailed, there was an obvious, it was very much a one-way channel. We produced something, we expected visitors, and visitors did engage with the work. We have Google Analytics, we assessed kind of what that take-up was, but there was no way we weren't able to connect with our visitors. We realized that it was it was like watching television, it was a one-way. So we began to think about, okay, what is a way that if we're always or committed to this idea of connectivity, how do we recreate not just an exhibition that you might, or an exhibition experience that you might have in a physical space, but how do we actually recreate a challenge, a sort of conference or a program? So the next project we launched was 1851 Spirit and Voice. And this we described as a theatrical experience. We worked with the playwright Luke Reese and with a historical consultant, Natasha Henry, to create a fictionalized conference that visitors had to register for or with, and you can see it here. This is how it looks embedded in our site. Again, hugely problematic. We too are reimagining our website to think through how we think about our content, our digital content online. At the moment, the experience of the content and the portal in which you access it are really, I think, at odds. They're not nearly, our website is not nearly as strong as some of the digital content. But this was the registration that we asked people. So it was like registering for a live event. It was a live streamed event. And what we, I will try to share my sound because I recognize that is going to be a, oh, here it is. Do I just go on to select a microphone, MacBook Pro? Is that how I do it? Where's
normally
Chris?
normally it's from the screen share menu from here in Zoom. So it should allow you to pick up a new, if you go from your green share box, you would then select your screen in the bottom left of that screen share menu. There should be a share computer audio.
Doesn't look like there is, or at least I don't know how to do it now. I'm going to leave it because everyone's seeing my fiddling about. But this spirit is the spirit and voice. This is the trailer for our project where we were tackling this challenge of connectivity. This is a conversation. And what was interesting about this project is we shot it at the St. Lawrence Market, where the abolitionists came together in 1851. It was a conference in 1851. They came to St. Lawrence Market, the Americans, Canadians, to join together. And really what Myseum did was film a play which had Marie and Anthony, you can see them here, two hosts, and they were visited by ghosts of the past, who are the educators and abolitionists who came together for that conference. And our registered came into the web experience and could choose a lounge. So we had experiences all together. And then you either joined Marianne Shad and Mary Bibb, or you went and met with Anthony and Frederick Douglass to talk through different issues around contemporary issues. So it was another way of bringing the past into the future. So this was our attempt at kind of connecting with visitors in new ways. And what you can see on the right-hand side of this, it's a screenshot. This was our not dissimilar to what is happening today, but there was a continual chat. There was a continual opportunity for people to engage, not with just with us, but with each other, and to go into breakout rooms. So it was Myseum's attempt at really thinking about what is this space that we're creating and how do we create and think about a kind of online. The third project I wanted to talk about is something we haven't yet launched, which is we're working on right now. And the challenge is less about how to translate an exhibition and more to figure out what the experience can be online when we're premiering or hosting work. This is called Untold Toronto. It's a collection of 4 unique pieces of work by Toronto Black artists. It's again, interdisciplinary and mixed. What I will say for small organizations is we've also been really savvy about getting large grants for these projects. And these projects are not single year, they're multi-year projects. So they take us anywhere from 2 years to 3 years. Myseum is about 10 people. We do about 15 projects a year. So we have an ongoing, not unlike any business that is kind of has projects launching up. We really think about how do we get multi-year grants and multi-year funding to keep activity going. So this is an online project, which really the context is very different for this. We have 4 Toronto-based artists who are talking about Black identity, feminine Black identity, masculine Black identity, the LGBTQ+I+ community, and the history of that community. And then also about the vernacular that is happening within Black communities. So it's commissioning for different artists. This, riffing on Peter's point, this is the first time we've created something that does not look like our website, that has a very different experience, that you kind of move from our website into a different site. So we're working with an external designer and external producer to think about what this looks like. This is the Black Girl Magic piece. And finally, this is Differently Still, which is an exploration of the vernacular, Black vernacular. And again, this hasn't launched. This won't be launching until February, but we really think about the fact that in a museum, the spaces, it's hermetic, it's sealed. Kendra talked a little bit about scaffolding. I think for us, it's a question of when we're online, what is the experience? It's completely different. And so how do we frame that, whether it's curatorially, but more it's contextually? I think the curator might not be the right voice to contextualize some of this work. And finally, I just wanted to flag up that our newest success has really been on social media channels, where we're doing a lot of shorts, TikTok and Instagram. We've been really, really interested in how we produce short stories and get them out there. Our next work, the fact that what we're thinking about now is how do we repurpose this actually in physical space? And how do we repurpose it again online? So not thinking that these are static exhibitions or static content, but that these pieces that we've created for these various sites can actually be repurposed in different ways. So that's it for me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Heidi. Very interesting to see kind of how Myseum continues to kind of blur those lines between online content and social media and exhibits and programs all back and forth and around, and how they kind of connect to each other. Very interesting. Thank you. We're going to move to the Q&A portion of today. So anybody wants to send a question to our panelists, you can type your message into the Q&A box. You can access at the bottom of your screen. We'll be joined in a second by our moderator, Sarah Beam-Borg. So I'll invite Sarah to turn her mic and camera on. Sarah is the Director of Business and Project Development at the award-winning Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto-based museum services and design firm Origin Studios. Sarah holds a Bachelor of Arts in Cultural Anthropology, Bachelor of Education, and is a certified project management professional with a postgraduate diploma in museum management and curatorship. Professional experience in museums has included roles as collection manager, assistant curator, project manager, senior exhibitions manager, and head of exhibitions and collections. Sarah is a lifelong learner and museum professional with a deep fascination for human history and the stories that could be told through artworks and objects. And having managed dozens of exhibition projects with collections and curators from around the world, Sarah brings innovative problem solving and international museum best practices to her work, developing expansive and intimate cultural spaces. So Sarah, as our moderator, I'll invite you to unmute and take a stab at getting some of these people to share more about their work and connecting with each other.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I'll speak very little because I would love to connect everybody here. Thanks, everyone, for turning your cameras on. There were a couple questions coming through as we went, and so I think I'd love to do those ones first, if that's okay, because they're obviously important to the question askers today. So the first one that came through was to all of our presenters here. Do you have any experience interpreting and creating online exhibits for younger audiences, like under 12 audiences? And is there any advice you can offer for making these types of online experiences for children something that educators can also use? I see some nodding. Do you want to put your hand up if you want to answer first? Peter, you're all set? Yeah.
So the answer is kinda in that I think that there are a number of projects that we've been involved with for that age range, and even right down to preschool, that actually have a lot of the hallmarks of online exhibits, but they're really cast as activities. It's not really the kind of, like, we wouldn't pitch it as an exhibition to that age group, but it might actually use some of the rules of the game that we use for exhibitions. So I think there's just a kind of, what do you call this thing question there, but it's there's definitely work we've done, for example, of connecting objects to stories and having activities around those in a kind of dedicated environment, which you could say that was an online exhibit.
I love it because that circles back to what you said in your talk about like what is an online exhibit, and whatever you want it to be, you call it an online exhibit. So I think there's a really nice cyclical aspect to that for sure. Natalie, Kendra, Heidi, anybody else want to step into the sort of younger audience experience?
We at MCA Chicago had a teen mentoring group. And they actually designed a site themselves. So we sort of gave them, I'm sure museums have also done this when you have like Instagram takeover, Twitter takeover, or, but we actually gave them a kind of Wix takeover. The ambition was to create something for young children. So we had teens creating for young children. And what we facilitated on our end was the conversations, the planning processes, that kind of design thinking framework for them. But then some of the design work, but really let them do it themselves. And what we found was, there was much more understanding, I guess, of what young people need. Not that educators don't have that, but it was more like an activity book. It was rather than a sort of passive. There was more. I mean, I will say Tate has done some phenomenal work for young people, like extraordinary work online. So if somebody is interested in examples, might not be within your budget range, but you could steal some ideas that maybe would be useful.
Awesome. Thanks. Anybody else want to sneak in, or shall we go to the next question? No? Okay. The next question that had come up was, let me just see where I am here. This one's for you, Natalie, directly. And you did kind of hint at it at the tail end of your presentation, but the question was, how was it received within the municipality that you wanted to have a different website experience? And it sounds like you're launching a new website soon. So maybe you can tell us a bit about how you navigated that. And obviously something worked if you've got a new one on the way.
Yeah, I mean, at the time we were kind of still flying under the radar a little bit. So while part of the municipality, we were kind of still on our own. So it wasn't a big issue for us to go out and just do our own thing. And now, that's changing a little bit in a good way. And we are actually being included in the city redoing their entire website. And I spoke to them about, well, hey, did you know we did this thing over here because the site we had wasn't working? So they're like, oh, we didn't even know that. So they're really interested to actually meet our needs in this redesign. So I would say, unlike a lot of municipalities, we were just kind of on our own to do that. So it wasn't a big deal at the time, but it's great to know that we're getting recognized now and going to get the support we need.
That's awesome. That's great. And one of the questions that came through was asking about the names of the programs that have been used. I've been capturing some of them as we've gone, and somebody really helpfully put some of that in about WordPress and the Google Arts and Culture. Peter, as you were speaking, though, there were a couple times where I was making notes while you were speaking, because some of the sites, and I can flag them if we need to, but like the Darwin project and the Outside In project, is that existing software? Is that something that your team customized? Are these, what are those ones didn't look templated?
Yeah. Those two, well, in general, we will build things specially, if you sort of mean, like we don't, we'll make templates, but we don't usually use templates, if that makes sense. Yeah. But with those two, so with the Outside In one, it's WordPress. It's part of a much larger WordPress site. But again, like we step outside of it for that actual page. And the stuff on the right-hand side was just normal WordPress. It's just design that made it look like that. The left-hand side where you had the space, The platform that's very handy for 3D models is called Sketchfab, so SKETCHFAB, and that is like a YouTube for 3D models. I'm sure they don't want to be called that, but that's what they're like. So it's very handy because you can kind of host stuff there in the same way as you host videos and then embed them into your website. And then we're able to program it to interact with the page.
Okay, cool.
And the other one was very, had a lot of map integration. So that's a platform called Mapbox. And it's a sort of thing you can subscribe to, and actually for free, mainly. And you can make custom maps rather than relying on the the kind of Google map thing, which is rather overdone and also sort of populated with their advertising. So it gives you your own, you can do your own colors, you can do all sorts of things like that. And they're not, I mean, it takes design skill, not so much coding or things like that. It's more of a design thing to use that.
Okay, so yeah, more aesthetic and more interface rather than having to code.
Exactly.
Change.
And at low levels of usage, like, in our sector, we're generally in low levels of usage compared to kind of commercial things. Those platforms are often free to use.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
And thanks hosts for popping those URLs into the chat. So if attendees don't have your chat window open, now would be a great time to go in there and harvest all of the URLs that are popping up in there. Okay, so we have questions coming in, but we also had some questions that were sent ahead of time. So I'm going to pop to those now, and then we'll hop on over. I'm keeping an eye on time. So to our panelists, how, and it'd be great to hear from a few of you. I know Peter and Kendra, you both have ideas for this one. How do you build interactivity into online exhibitions? Because I think it was really, really kind of salient when Heidi said, we don't want to just recreate watching TV, right? Like that passive one-way receiving information. Can you guys talk a bit about interactivity? Peter, do you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to. Don't want to hog the airwaves, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right.
I think it's a really big consideration for us in almost all of the projects that we do. And some of, also it's a bit like saying, well, what even is interactivity? We could start questioning every dimension of our projects, but the kind of things that we tend to focus on, because we're very audience focused, like we always try to start with an audience concept and like work on for that. And we'll often break that down into segments and go, so what does this audience want to do? What does that audience want to do? And even acknowledging that some audiences do want to be passive consumers. Yeah. But mixing those all together, the things that typically come out are things like there's the interaction with the presentation. So for example, that Darwin thing, there's a lot of theatricality around the presentation, and we want it to kind of feel like this kind of storytelling, but also cartographic experience. So there's a lot of little kind of things to kind of play with. So that's a sort of coming from them to the tech kind of interaction. But then in other spheres, we really want to try and actually get material from the audiences. So, and we saw that in many of the examples. And Heidi, you showed some there where you had the chat kind of happening on the side, and that level of engagement can be really different. So you can have it, chat is like a really valuable kind of mass consumption kind of thing where you get a lot of data, a lot of insight very quickly, and people get communication as a kind of benefit from it. But the user-generated content thing is something that we really like to play with, and we like creative user-generated content. So, for example, art submissions or doing stuff with film or audio, music, like really kind of playing with that and getting those sent in and kind of getting those involved into the online exhibit. And then the final thing I'll say on this is actually then getting the audience to talk about what they like or don't like about what those things that came in. One of the frames we've often used is this be the curator concept. So we say, hey, this is a museum. It is a product of curatorship. What is curatorship? why don't you be a curator? And then have them remix all of the material into their own galleries and their own things. And it sounds like a big project, but actually we've been able to do that at very low cost, very quickly. Many of the pivot projects, I'm sure we're not allowed to use that word anymore, but anyway, they have been based on that.
Awesome. Thank you. And Kendra, can I turn to you for same question?
Sure. I echo Peter. I think we're all deeply interested in this idea about being visitor-centered and what that could look like. When we sat down to think about Google Arts and Culture, there is an entire suite of options for interactivity. And for us, what actually was most useful was we have an advisory panel of about 5 different people. They do not have background specific to digital technologies, but they do have some kind of interest, investment, connection to the content. And we had a good conversation with them about what would be a useful or meaningful type of interactivity. Is it a chat box? Is it a game? Is it a kind of poll where you see live submissions coming in? And all of that really helped us parse out the kinds of experiences that would lead us to our bigger goals rather than just being another gimmicky internet fad that we could try on any website. And I think that also helps to distinguish what's unique about this experience, this collection, why we should be using it now. That was our approach.
Awesome. Thank you very much. This one I'm going to toss to you, Natalie. How do we leverage our knowledge of in-person exhibits in online exhibits?
Yeah, I think ultimately exhibits are storytelling. That's what we're here to do is to do stories, whether it's a single display case, a Facebook post, a virtual exhibit, it's all about storytelling. So those skills translate really well. And I think one of the comments I made, go to a really technical level, label writing. Again, it's just being succinct and being able to write succinct short labels that have punch and tell things. That really plays well in that virtual sphere. And overall for me, the online is really it's the introduction. That's how we've approached it, is that any of our online content is an introduction, whether they're going to come to us to dive more into it or just go out on their own to dive more into it. We're providing that introduction. So I think those are things from the in-person exhibit that can leverage the online.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to now pop back to some of our live questions that are coming in. The one that's been waiting a little while. How important is visitor viewer choice in curating online experience? Like a guided experience, choose your own adventure, bouncing between pages. How important is that when you're doing your planning? Anybody want to leap in?
I can think again about our advisory panel. And one thing that came out of those groups were about visitors who are using a new tool. They should be able to easily access and identify the kinds of things they're looking for. And so I think there is always a fine balance between seeing all of the options and being overwhelmed by everything that's out there. And so if we can somehow navigate to that right space where you feel confident about you have the tools to look at this experience, be it a video, game, whatever it may be, that I think is where we really want to start pushing our practice. So certainly the idea of choice points, but to a point where it really makes sense.
Okay, that's great. It's a fine balance. I think
very much a fine balance. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Anybody else want to sneak in on that one, or shall I hop along? All right, I'm going to keep going. This is, again, to all the presenters. Is there a value in the ephemeral nature of online experiences, like the use of social media platforms? Though nothing is lost on the internet, maybe audience engagement is not sustained over long periods. Is there something to be argued for the brevity? Yep, Peter?
Yes, there is. And I think it's a question to ask yourself when you're planning. We come back to planning is this a forever thing, or is this kind of an event? And like events, think about how you use events and even really exhibitions in your gallery spaces, that they themselves have that kind of pattern of peaks of attendance, and then it sort of tails off. And then sometimes also if you go, it's closing next week, then suddenly there's a bit of a spike back up again. And these things actually apply in digital as much as anywhere else. And one of the things, a very common tactic for any kind of cultural sector venue, but museums in particular, is that events are used to drive attendance and visitor numbers. And you kind of put them together, like, so that all of their little peaks over the year add up to like a fairly consistent kind of intake of people. And it works the same way in digital. So you can plan your programming around those expected kind of peaks and troughs. And then you can build up a kind of a year's programming or even longer.
Thanks. Heidi?
I was just going to say, to Peter's point, which I think is really interesting, and actually Natalie talked a little bit about introductions not necessarily being conversions to the gallery, but introductions to the content. I think you can think about your in-person and your online as layers of programming. So like museums have found people who come to late night events might not convert to come and spend 3 hours on a Sunday afternoon, and that's fine. That's their engagement. So if you think about, oh, somebody's really engaged with me on social media and they're on Instagram and I can see the numbers, but they never come to my website and spend 2 hours, that's totally fine because that's their engagement. So to Peter's point, it's like thinking about planning out the layers of engagement or the pace. We talk a lot about pace in our institution. What's the cadence for, and who are the different audiences at different moments? I have a question, but I'll wait until you're finished, Sarah. But I have a question for Kendra and Natalie and others. Okay,
cool. But I want to just like reiterate that was a really lovely point, Heidi, about like, this is kind of we're moving into a new museology that is like a buffet museology, right? It's not one big monolith offering. This is what we've done. This is what you get. It's, there's dialogue, there's debate, people make mistakes, people fix their mistakes. It's much more live and it is. And people walk up to a buffet and choose however much they want to consume. And so this fits into that new, more generous, I think, a model. So thank you. That was an awesome point. Okay, I'm going to keep us going. We have 3 minutes left. We have a lot of questions. So let's not, maybe, I won't go through all of them. Let me just see. Okay, one of the questions is about what techniques have you used to promote to your museum audience? This is a nice one because it's one of like, the internet is full of noise. Like, how are you getting this? How are you getting this to your audiences? Does anybody want to sneak in on that one? Like, Natalie, how are you guys like advertising? I don't mean to peg you here, but like, how do you make sure people know you've done it?
Yeah, so for us, mostly it is on social. So on Facebook and stuff is where we're saying, hey, you want to go into this a little bit more in depth, go here, you're looking for something different. So probably once or twice a month, we'll do those kind of posts that just remind people that we have that digital museum site content.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry, Heidi.
No, I was also going to say, Sarah, is more and more, I think there's a blurring between what is content and what is marketing. Right. And I don't think any longer that exists. I think, we're probably using, like everyone, traditional, there's posters and there's flyers and there's social media. But what we're discovering as well is that digital realm is very blurry. Right. On what we construe as content and what we construe as advertising. So just putting that out there.
Yeah, nice. Kendra, you got your hand up?
I do. I'll just throw in here, this idea about blur, I think is really, really important to think about. We were actually very surprised at how much word of mouth still was a very, very useful driver for our online content. And we did this almost intentionally with how we built in our guest contributors to the experience. So we had an expert on disaster theory based in London who is promoting to their network. And we have another group of people who are working in Japan who are promoting to their network. And so we still used a lot of the older analog tools in this very new technology for us. And it's been very useful.
Awesome. Thank you. Peter, yeah.
Yeah, if I've got time, that I'm really interested in that question about the blurring of like what is marketing and what is exhibit. with that Max Dean exhibition that I showed at the outset, we, as an experiment, there's only, I think there's 12 pieces in that exhibit. It's a small group of works. We asked ourselves, what if we just put every week or so one piece as an Instagram post and boosted it? So we put advertising money behind it. And then we would say, well, it's kind of like our little exhibit in little pieces over time. Let's just see what that does for us. And so we did, and we got really interesting numbers back, and also a consideration about going to where your audiences are rather than expecting them to come to you. So we did get a little bit of people coming back to us from it, but Instagram's a pain for that anyway, so we weren't expecting a lot. But what was really interesting is just seeing the engagement and who was looking and how they were different to our kind of, in inverted commas, mainstream audience that we were having to the website.
Awesome. Thank you. We have hit time. I'm sure Chris has a closeout he'd like to do, but let me just sneak in with one last thought. And this is something that in my current practice, I'm feeling really passionate about. And so what I want to say is thank you to everybody who spoke today. We all know the torrent, the volume of work that is on every desk and every inbox of museum workers and workers in the glam sector right now. You guys are stretching muscles that make other people nervous. You guys are doing incredible work. And what I just want to say to everybody who's attended, thank you for the questions. I'm doing the follow-up thing for Chris, so I will try to capture all of these free software things. I'll do URLs. I'll give you a real hodgepodge handout after. But stay in touch with each other, reach out to each other, lean on each other. We're all learning together. And if we open the doors to our networks in genuine ways, the dividends are incredible. And I just thank you guys for sharing this today. I feel like, well, we've also done the tech check together, but I feel like I've got new friends in this field. I absolutely will be reaching out to you. I hope people reach out to me. We're all easily found on LinkedIn. Keep talking, keep communicating, and keep sharing, because if we are gatekeeping this information, it is so difficult for overburdened museum staff to figure it out on their own. So thanks, guys. Chris, over to you.
Well, thank you so much again to everyone for speaking today. I hope I can encourage us all that this is not a be-all and end-all conversation. This is not the definitive answer to all the things we brought up today. I hope that we'll stay in touch over the period of time to make sure all those questions that were asked today in that Q&A or brought up by our panelists today are things that we can maybe, if not come up with an answer to, but certainly have more conversations around in the future. Through our research with George Brown College, we're seeing that our visitors to our museums that are most engaged are visiting us both in person and online. Those audiences are not independent. They are not sort of taking away from one another. It is a omni-channel experience of the museum on all platforms. And we want to make sure that every museum in Ontario has the opportunity to benefit from that and be a player in that digital, interactive, online, in-person nebulous sphere. I wanted to thank all of our presenters again today. So that's Kendra, Heidi, Natalie, and Peter. Thank you to our moderator, Sarah Beam-Borg. Thank you to Leah Resnick, Irene Chalmers, and Mary Collier, all of whom worked with me at different times to help kind of puzzle through some of these questions and make sure that we had a coherent set of thoughts as we came into today's webinar. And thank you to our funding partner, the Government of Canada, for bringing you the Small Bytes webinar series. This webinar was recorded and will be available by email as soon as we can get it processed. We're working on putting together a resource that would follow this to include all of those things that we talked about today, and kind of a menu of options or ways that you could consider approaching online exhibits for your museum. When you're leaving the webinar, you'll be directed to a survey that will help us both evaluate today's webinar and help us plan for future webinars. And then stay tuned to OMA's social channels or your weekly newsletter to hear about more of our future PD opportunities. I thank you again to all of our speakers, and please stay in touch with us at the OMA. You can find us at oma@museumsontario.ca is our general inbox, or across all of our social channels at @museumsontario. Thank you so much to everyone. Have a great rest of your day and have a lovely weekend and a wonderful March break. I get to see everybody's programs all advertised and things, so have an exciting March break across the province. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great afternoon.